UFC 294 happened yesterday, and I'm going to be giving my thoughts on all the fights that I find worthy of noting, meaning I'm not going to be going over every single fight all the way from the early prelims to the main event, just the ones that I feel like really giving some commentary on. Let's get started with the feature fight of the early prelims, Sharifudin Magomedov versus Bruno Silva. Everyone's been hyping this guy's UFC debut for a while. Didn't know much about him besides the undefeated record till this week when everyone started talking about how he sucker punched the guy for kissing his girlfriend on the cheek. And then I also found out about he was being a sore loser in a jiu-jitsu tournament after he kicked the guy. Speaking of grappling, I never thought I would have seen a Dagestani with some of the weakest takedown defense. But in terms of the striking between him and Bruno Silva, I think his his boxing had a little bit left to be desired. But his leg kicks were doing the trick and resulted in a significant amount of damage to the thigh of Bruno Silva. So much so that he switched stances even as a striker, he went in for the takedown. But what's even crazier than that is even on bottom position, Magomedov still landed the better strikes. Silva just couldn't get any good ground and pound going. Magomedov was just hammer fisting and going with the elbows to the head of Silva. So overall, I do agree with that 30-27 decision. He can't justify giving that a single round to Silva when he was getting his ass whooped from a more dominant position. But the biggest takeaway from this fight is that Magomedov's boxing and takedown defense are sus. Chimaev could have really been looking at this fight and realizing how easy this guy would have been. More on Chimaev later. All right, so we'll get to the first instance of bad reffing that occurred last night in the Wood and Naimov fight. Naimov was constantly cheating, and the ref did absolutely nothing about it. It just stood there doing absolutely nothing. There's two nut shots, a fence grab, apparently a glove grab that I didn't catch it during the live broadcast. But what's the whole point in refs if the fighters are just allowed to cheat? They did the same thing during the O'Malley and Yan fight. It happened last year. The ref should have taken a point in the second, and it's just another instance of bad reffing in Ahu Dhabi. But one of my favorite fights this entire event was probably Breeden and Jubilee. I absolutely loved watching this. First two rounds, Breeden was getting pieced up, suffered a cut above the eye, and it was clear who was going to win had it gotten a decision. What I did not see happening was Breeden, nothing to lose by the third round. On his way to losing a decision, he just started acting like a complete madman, going feral. He was taunting Jubilee and started barking, yelling USA, and just talking shit. And then it was pretty clear that I was getting into Jubilee's head because he looked so petrified and it drastically affected his performance. You could see it on his face. And then it led to him getting knocked out at 3 minutes into the third round. Breeden, the guy was yet to win a UFC fight, gave Jubilee a 7-0 fighter his first loss. Just goes to show that this game isn't all physical, it's mental as well, and this fight perfectly encapsulated that. That's all I'll cover for the early prelims. Now onto the prelims. I'll start with how terrible this ringside doctor in Abu Dhabi was to try to tell Victor Henry that he didn't get kicked in the nuts whenever the guy, after the fact, he was vomiting and had to go to the hospital following the fight. His testicles were, in the words of his one cornerman, Josh Barnett, the size of Satsumas. Even the commentary was speaking out against it whenever the doctor was trying to tell him that he wasn't hit in the nuts, and then John Anik goes, "How can you tell him he wasn't kicked in the testicles?" Like he was getting pissed. And then the news following the Lobo paired with the immediate reaction just tells me it wasn't fake. If it was fake, then he has better acting credentials than Aljamain Sterling. How would it make sense for him to quit the fight? It's not like the first round was an absolutely lopsided victory for Basharat. I think that's how you say his name. The only thing separating them two in terms of the scoring was a takedown, and that didn't really lead to much of anything. And then Henry won on one of the three judges' scorecards. I know he didn't know that in the moment, but it was clear that the fight was relatively close, and the other guy just edged it out slightly. I enjoyed watching the Trevor Peak fight as well. That was a good watch. But let's get to Tim Elliott and Muhammad Makayev. I hate watching Muhammad Mokaev's fights. He's the most boring flyweight in the entire division. He's terrible for the UFC. He's going to kill the division. I think at the highest levels, actually, I think his striking did get exposed yesterday. At least in the beginning, I mean, actually, Elliott was just up in his face, pressuring him, and they're kind of taunting him with just that, just allowing him, opening himself up essentially for the takedown by lifting up his leg. I mean, he was doing a good job at pressuring him in the beginning, and then he was able to stuff his takedowns. Round one, there was an illegal knee from Tim, but that's a stupid ass rule that they need to get rid of, anyways. And it's just so dumb that fighters can milk that whole knee to the grounded opponent rule. And that seems to be, well, I don't know. The story of this card seems to be really just fouls in general. Fouls and bad reffing, just absolutely shit reffing. But anyways, back to the fight. It's just unfair that fighters can just automatically just lift up their hands and then put them back down, just playing the, as DC was saying, playing the game. And actually, the commentators were saying, that the refs are saying you can't really play that game. It's just dumb that you can just be immune from damage just because you're either on your knees or putting your hand on the ground. So you have 3 points of contact. I guess for the fight though, is Muhammad Mokaev's most entertaining fight. Everything else has just been him backpacking people for 3 rounds, and it's boring as fuck. I genuinely can't stand watching this guy fight, and I just want somebody to derail his hype train. I'm sorry. I'm not saying he's not talented. I'm not saying he's not a good grappler. I'm saying he's boring as fuck. I mean, realistically, I know that Kai Kara France and Manel Kape had that build up from his last fight, but honestly, I wouldn't be mad if they booked Manel Kape versus Mokaev. I think Mokaev would get sparked. At least I hope he would. If he doesn't hug him for 3 rounds, because we need to put an end to this boring Dagestani hype train. So on to the main card, Saeed Nurmagomedov comes back with an impressive submission win in less than a minute and a half. So kudos to him. That was cool. Cool to see. Glad he came back with a win after his last fight. Then Ikram Aliskerov and Warley Alves. That was just a complete mismatch. I saw Aliskerov winning just by decimation, really. So far, the guy seems to be a beast. He won his last fight by first round finish as well. But I would have rather seen Nasruddin Imamov in terms of, not just entertainment and having a fight that's not going to end super quick, but also just in terms of ranking and, actually having these guys climb up the division, because it was really just there, I guess, just as a placeholder on that card, really. That's all it was, just a placeholder. I understand though that Nasruddin Imamov had visa issues, so that screwed up the whole fight. So I'm fine with what happened. I'm just saying, ideally, yes, I would have rather seen Nasruddin Imamov fight him. You still can't help but feel like some of these fights on this card was an absolute mismatch, though, for real. All right, let me get started on this Ankalaev and Walker fight. It was relatively back and forth until Johnny Walker, and this is where he screwed himself. He faked being hurt with a body shot in order to go for the flying knee. Flying knee failed, and he ended up against the cage. Ankalaev illegally knees him in the face as he was up against the cage, while Johnny Walker had a knee to the ground. But even after that, ref stops the fight. Ref does what he should have done. That was fine. It was an illegal move. But Walker was completely ready to continue right after it happened. He even motioned for Ankalaev to come back just so they could start the fight. Keep going with the fight. Cage side doctor steps in and tries to see if he has a concussion. It's hard to hear exactly what was said, but it was the same dumbass, shitty doctor who told Victor Henry that he didn't get kicked in the nuts and then tried to rush Walker when trying to make sure he wasn't concussed while he was asking him whatever he was asking him. Like, they didn't, I don't think they even gave him an entire minute before they ended up calling off the fight. Like I said, it's hard to exactly catch what was said, but supposedly the doctor asked him, "Do you know what country you're in?" And Walker asked, "What round was it?" I don't really buy that, though. I think that's fake news. Can't prove it, but I don't. That doctor is sus. It's like he was just there to ruin the card even worse than there already was. That guy sucks at his job and he needs to be fired immediately. Then to make things worse, the two guys were still trying to fight even after the ref waved it off. And that was probably the most entertaining thing about the last 3 fights. Main card was terrible. Speaking of terrible, let's get to the co-main event. I don't think this fight is getting enough flack for the right reasons. All right, so Usman and Chimaev was supposed to happen. It was in the talks. Usman and Chimaev was in talks after he had fought Holland, and it had gone back and forth in between Costa and Usman for a while there, from what I was hearing from the media. Really, both of these two, they just had a bunch of names thrown out for who their next opponent was. Usman's supposed to fight Bilal Muhammad, but then before that, it was supposed to be Wonder Boy, but then before that, I think it was originally Chimaev. So everybody's just been anticipating these two coming back to the cage finally after so long since their last fight, especially Chimaev. I think he's been out for over a year at this point. One of the biggest things that people really wanted to see was if Usman is really done and if Chimaev is really just a can crusher. In my opinion, this fight did not at all live up to the hype, and the fact that there are some people that really think Costa had no chance against Chimaev is laughable after watching what happened. I understand the possible reasons or excuses behind both these guys' performance. Usman was on short notice, 11 days. He's fighting a weight class above his normal weight class, even though he's just really cutting less weight. He's got to be cutting a shit ton of weight just to make 170. And then Chimaev had a drastic style matchup change, which that can affect, performances. I don't want to go too hard on Usman because of the short notice, but there's still reasonable criticism for both parties. So Chimaev did great first round. He out-grappled the fuck out of Usman. He was just manhandling him. That was the real question. Even the commentary was talking about it. Was could Marty Juiceman really defend the takedowns from Chimaev? First round, I most definitely give that a 10-8. It was a clear win for Chimaev. He won the round by a large margin, and it was evident that he had dominated that round. The second round was actually pretty close, but the only thing that differentiated it was second round was really close. And the only thing that differentiated it between the two was one exchange where Usman rocked Chimaev. I don't have any problems with giving that round to him. The third one is the controversial one, and this is the one that I'm not really agreeing with what most of the fans are saying. I don't agree with the narrative they're trying to push. I don't think Usman won that round at all. He had one exchange where he landed the louder shots that didn't really do any significant damage to Chimaev, then proceeded to get out grappled by Chimaev again. I don't have any problem with that decision, but here's the thing that everyone is missing, at least from what I've been seeing. Neither of these guys look good in this fight at all. Like I said, I understand Usman had all the excuses, the short notice, the knee injuries that he's trying to cover up and even really deny, but everybody knows it. And even he's talked about it in prior videos, like interview with Joe Rogan and other interviews. So for him to try and say that there's nothing wrong with his knees, you're on camera saying it. But either way, you can't take away from the fact that he's a shell of himself compared to even 2 fights ago. The same Usman that fought Colby's gone. And I don't know why I see people saying that Usman looked good in that fight. No, he didn't. The only reason he looked good is because Chimaev did that bad. Chimaev had an absolutely terrible performance after the first round. First round was great. Even his takedowns looked like absolute shit, even in the first round. It's like he chokes every single time he faces a ranked opponent, and he could have just been exposed as a can crusher. I'll tell you why I think that, even though it should be pretty obvious. He was 10-0, all finishes, but clearly not at the highest levels of the UFC. He fights Gilbert Burns, number 3 contender at the time, in order to get fast tracked to a title shot, which the UFC has a problem doing these days. There was a lot of cope and excuses as to why he didn't just run through him in one round. Everyone said that he was afraid of the jiu-jitsu, as he should be. You're facing a guy that's also a high-level grappler. Granted, he couldn't submit Masvidal, but that's a different story. That was a great fight, though, and showed that he still had more that he needed to improve on, despite looking like an absolute Terminator prior to that. Then he's supposed to fight Nate Diaz, and everybody knows what happened with the weight miss, and he ended up fighting Kevin Holland. Ragdolls him, makes him tap in less than 3 minutes. So it was pretty much a wrestling match. It wasn't even really an MMA fight. Then last night, he fights a former champion, proceeds to do barely anything after the first round, and without the same level of confidence as he normally has that we're used to seeing. Anybody noticing a trend here? I'll tell you exactly what it is, and it's the number next to the name. If there is no number next to the name, he just demolishes them. If it's a ranked opponent, then he just chokes. So I think he's a can crusher at this point. And I don't think, especially after this fight, I don't think either of these guys deserve a title shot, whether you deem it a robbery or not. Usman's done and Chimaev's hype train is dying. Imagine if either one of those guys would have fought Strickland in that state. Imagine that. Strickland would have put relentless pressure on Chimaev as he was gassing out. Usman gave him space. Could you imagine what Chimaev would have done if he just had somebody that was just in his face the entire time that isn't just going to stand there and do absolutely nothing? If Strickland would have fought the Chimaev of last night, it would have ended the same way that his fight with Abus Magomedov did. And this is the same guy that they said could be a triple champ. Honestly, I did believe that he could have been a triple champ at one point. I thought he had the best wrestling in the UFC until now. Terrible performances on both parts. I don't want to see either of these guys fight Strickland, even if Usman beat him back in the day. Sean would have destroyed both of these guys in the same night. Give DDP the title shot. Hell, Dreykus would have destroyed both those guys. But the big takeaway from this fight is that Chimaev's boxing and his cardio are super sus. Granted, there's already been a suspicion about his cardio, but I say this is just more confirmation than even the previous fights. This also proves that we need to stop trying to fast track these hype trains to the title shot. And I know what you can say. You can say O'Malley, Edwards, and Islam because they didn't really fight ranked opponents to get to the title. Okay, fine. Yeah, that happens. But then you have instances like Chimaev or Darren Till that they just get fast tracked to the top, and then they're just never the same after that. After taking a brutal loss, Chimaev's not there yet. But if he keeps fighting these high level guys that he's clearly not ready for, then that's probably what is going to happen to him, and it's just going to make everybody look like a fool. All the people that backed him, the matchmaker of these fights, and him, especially after all of his shit talking, saying "I kill everybody." It's just kind of a disappointing thing to see. This fight made the card worse. Well, this fight made the main card worse. This fight made the main card worse. I thought the prelims and the early prelims were fine, even though a lot of people do seem to disagree. Maybe it wasn't amazing, but I didn't really have too many complaints with most of them. I think the main card was the worst part of it, and I can't believe I paid $80 for those 5 fights. All right, so on to the main event. There's not much I want to really say about the actual fight itself. In terms of breaking it down, first round head kick KO. If anything, I want to cover the before and after this fight. I had a bad feeling about this one because of the fact that it was on short notice, paired with the fact that Volkanovski had surgery after his last fight, even mentioned in his post fight interview. He got the surgery July 18th, then he had to wait for 6 weeks of rehab. After 6 weeks of rehab, he can get back to full contact training. He was also clearly not as good of shape as he normally is. Guy was coming off the couch, clearly. Had to cut 26 pounds for this fight. Knowing all of this, I still didn't think the odds favored him. I did not have a good feeling about this one. Makachev isn't someone you beat on 11 days' notice. Bobby Green had a similar turnaround. I can't remember exactly how much time he had, but I remember he just got done fighting Nasrat Haqparast, and then he got TKO'd in the first by Islam, who had a full training camp. I mean, Volkanovski even said it best. You can't Can't beat that guy on 11 days' notice. So I'll go into the reasoning as to why I'm concerned after this fight. I was watching a Lucas Tracy video, and he said that he could see Volkanovski fighting well past his prime because of his competitive nature. I think the most concerning thing is that Lucas Tracy might actually have an accurate prediction. I'm just kidding. I actually like Lucas Tracy's content. But on a serious note, it doesn't seem like it's going to be too far off from the truth. In his post-fight interview, he said that he needed this fight to keep himself busy, essentially, for his mental state, because he said he's not really doing too well whenever he's not in training camp or fighting. And this isn't all that unusual for fighters either. Even in the post-fight press conference, they brought up how this happens to Tyson Fury, how he's pretty much in dark places whenever he's not training for fights. I haven't necessarily followed his career a lot, but I remember reading an article about how he used to weigh 400 pounds and gain weight because of alcohol and drugs. And it would make sense that this happens, whenever he doesn't have a fight to concentrate on. Similar thing with McGregor. He goes over this in his documentary, which is why he does all that stupid shit, like picking fights with old guys on bar stools, mascots, or rappers. This I could see being a big factor as to why he will fight past his prime, because he needs something to drive him to wake up every day. And as he said, he doesn't do too well whenever he's not in training camp. He nearly broke into tears when being asked these questions at the post-fight press conference. I'm not just concerned for him as a fighter. Like, I genuinely hope this guy's okay. Like, I hope his mental state is good. I also don't know how the KO is going to affect the future of his career. Last time he was finished was on the regional scene by Corey Nelson, and it took him 3 rounds to do that. I think there's a lot up in the air right now. He's 35, coming off a bad finish loss. His next challenge is Topuria, a dangerous guy, like anywhere the fight goes. The guy's got power in his hands. And he showed that in his fight against Emmett for 5 rounds. I have a feeling that, and I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong about all of this, but I have a feeling, because we're not talking about a close decision that this guy just lost. It's all, we're talking about he got finished in a very devastating fashion. At least that first loss, he could come back and improve and learn from his mistakes and adjust well in that fight. You can always, if you spend that much cage time with somebody, you gotta feel for them at that point already. But for him to get finished like that, yeah, I really don't know, man. And to be fair, this is a lose-lose for Makhachev. So either he wins because he has an opponent that's off the couch on short notice, or he's a bum because he loses to a guy coming off the couch on short notice. I'm not a huge Islam fan, but you can't really trash the guy for being put in a bad situation. He can't control the fact that Oliveira got a cut and then pulled out of the fight, especially since it's a pay-per-view, and you wouldn't want this event getting canceled like John Jones did when Chael Sonnen offered to step in on short notice as a replacement for Dan Henderson, I think it was. And then I also understand Volkanovski wanted to get that champ status as well as saving the card, but this wasn't well thought out. It could very well spell the end of him, or he can come back from this loss and just go back to being the king of 145. The thing that really sucks about this, the thing that I hate, is that I think he could have beaten Islam, because he's the one that gave him the most trouble. He came out with Islam came out with more damage than Volkanovski after that 5 rounds. I think Volkanovski could have attained that double champ status and be greater than he already is. More than likely now, we'll probably never know if Volkanovski, after having gone 5 rounds, knowing what he needs to improve on, with Makhachev, with a full training camp, could have come back and finished Islam or even beat him convincingly in a decision. But because he took this on short notice, I don't see him getting like that Max Holloway treatment and getting a trilogy with Islam, especially with other contenders lining up for that 155 strap. And Islam wanted to probably go to do a super fight with Colby. So now he's just kind of, more than likely, that conversation is either dead or getting put on hold for a while. And like I said, Volkanovski's 35, so he doesn't have that much time left as an athlete, unfortunately. Anyways, that's all I got to say for today. This is my first MMA video, so let me know what you think. Give me some feedback. Tell me what I did right, what I did wrong, any changes I can make, some good constructive criticism. or not constructive criticism. Go ahead and like, comment, subscribe, share, and stay tuned for the next video.